wants to meet in what is called in committee. When the board wants to meet in committee, executives are often recused. So the principle of being asked to recuse is not an issue. It was the fact that it just came from the blue. It just came from the blue. I had no sense whatsoever that I knew the minister was coming, but I had no sense that she would arrive and ask us to excuse ourselves. And of course, in that instance, we truly complied with the.
And you were then later in that day issued the letter of suspension
Correct.
with the view that you'd interfere with an inquiry or something that was going to take place. Was that the reasoning? And that inquiry, was that the Denton's inquiry? Are you aware? I'm just trying to pick up, is that the Denton's inquiry that was then instituted?
Yes, that was what eventually became the Denton's inquiry. I remember that there was the chair had in fact appointed another party to conduct the inquiry, but had not followed procurement procedure, so that fell through, and then Denton's were then appointed. And by the way, one of the things which was indicated was that we would be interviewed for that inquiry. I was actually never afforded the opportunity to to speak to the investigators. Um, of course, as you may recall, when they first released one of the versions of that report, they issued a media statement indicating that there had not been any wrongdoing that had been found against me and the other executives. But I was not even favored with a copy of the report. I still have not seen the Denton's report.
Thank you. But the, they were appointed on the 20th of April to the 18th of June, which was in that period. And we now know the committee members have got a copy of that report, and it's quite a scathing and damning indication of Eskom at the time and the procurement, and it deals with a number of issues. And yes, it did indicate that there's no wrongdoing on your part, mainly because you were there for such a short period. But what it does indicate, for example, is significant breaches of the Public Finance Management Act in procurement, and that's what you raised as well in your earlier evidence, that there were significant issues relating to procurement. And if you take just one example, the diesel purchases, which seems to have been clothed with secrecy, where they indicate significant breaches of the Public Finance Management Act, as well as page 97, a potential wastage due to not arranging discounts with ad hoc suppliers, which may be in the order of 200 million rand over the past 2 years. Now that is significant, and it does raise a lot of questions. And it also mentions in its reports the diesel costs may have been a result of Eskom having to mitigate load shedding, but it does not make commercial sense to not seek to renegotiate the legacy contracts of diesel. And it is also concerning that 30 months can pass without a meaningful approach to drive down the cost of ad hoc diesel supplies. We know diesel was a big issue. And it says, taken together with the proliferation of red flags over the bona fides of the diesel procurement process, Eskom's management of this expenditure requires closer scrutiny. We now know that nothing was done with that report under the subsequent board, and it was, in fact, the next chairman, and it will be good for him to explain why he sat on that report, and when it did eventually come out, a lot of the issues came out. But I think I just wanted to put that part on record, and that it appears that that was the inquiry that was then instituted. What I'd like to just quickly with you in the limited time, I'd like to just raise the issue of your involvement and your knowledge of the Glencore Oak Bay purchase of Optimum Mines and that Tegeta issue. Because we know in July already of 2013, Glencore issued their hardship clause on their Optimum mine, and then price negotiations began. And they were still ongoing with your previous CEO, Mr. Machila. And when you were appointed then in October of 2014, they seem to be progressing well. Now, the next CEO that is then appointed after you, Mr. Brian Molefe, immediately stops. What seemed to have been, and the evidence is that from the business rescue practitioner, that the negotiations with Eskom were ongoing and were progressing well with a renegotiated price. But then, when Mr. Molefe was appointed, he refused to sign a new agreement with Glencore, which forced Optimum into business rescue, and that was in May of 2015, which was shortly. You were there until March 2015. What was your role as CEO in overseeing that process of the Optimum negotiations on price, and were you satisfied with the progress that had been made?
Yes, I did deal with that matter. And at the time I dealt with it, already the negotiations had been underway between Glencore and Eskom. So, to a large extent, I was only just familiarizing myself with the issues at the time. It was a complex matter. So, I had given an audience to the Glencore executives who were responsible, and obviously they were lobbying. The Eskom negotiators, on the other hand, felt that they were willing to consider a different price. It was just a matter of where the threshold should be that would deliver a win-win. So I was quite eager for a solution to be found, because what Glencore was saying to us at the time was that, well, if they can't find joy, or an outcome, that is reasonable, they would have to shut down, and that would obviously affect, security of supply, to the plant. I think it was Hendrina, the station that they supplied. So it was in our interest that a solution be found, but a solution that was not at the expense of Eskom. So the Eskom negotiators felt that Glencore wanted Eskom to bear a disproportionate amount of the risk and the pain that was necessitated by the circumstances in which Glencore found themselves. I left the matter in that space. There was not no conclusion yet by the time I left.
Were you surprised when you subsequently heard of the steps that Mr. Molefe took as your successor to immediate cut off all negotiations with Optimum, with Glencore, impose a penalty, and put other pressure that we now have evidence of, which you might not have had? Were you quite surprised about that, and what do you think was the motivation for that?
I couldn't speculate about the motivation, certainly, and of course, what I do know is what I read in the newspapers. I do recognize, however, that it was a shift. It was a shift in terms of approach from where I left the matter, and what my successor actually eventually, the posture and the direction in which he managed the issue. Clearly, there was a significant shift. The reasoning for it, what information was before him that led him in that direction, I couldn't quite tell, and I couldn't prejudge.
Have you been following in the media the subsequent developments around the Tegeta and the purchase of Optimum, where we've heard of the evidence of the business rescue practitioner who indicated that had they been offered those same terms at the beginning as the business rescue practitioner, with a reduced penalty, 2 billion penalty down to 500, with being able to sell coal not to Hendrina but to honor it, which was the export coal, at a significant increased price, that would have resolved the issue from the word go. And that was the negotiation and the resulting deal with Tegeta, which we know is Oak Bay, which we know is Gupta related. Was that a surprise to you?
No, I followed all of those. I mean, I followed the story. I followed the story in the public protector's report, and I've been following all of those things. As I said, in relation to where I left the matter and what subsequently happened, clearly there's significant shift, and on the face of it, and without actually delving into the details of this, I did not know what information was in front of my successor
Yes.
in adopting the position that he did. I couldn't, you know,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that that's a matter that requires a probing. I can hear what you're saying about, you know, what the rescue practitioner said. You know, it seems to tie in with where the matter was when I left it, because we were negotiating for a price, a price, a win-win price for Eskom and for Glencore.
So you've read the Public Protector's report, and only a small part of that has been taken on review relating to the presidential powers. The factual findings have not been taken on review by Eskom or anyone else. And the Public Protector found that the board substantially benefited the Tegeta mines in this whole process, that the whole process was to benefit Tegeta mines. Would you have any reason to disagree with that finding?
No, I mean, it is what it is. It is in the until
it's taken on review.
Yes, until somebody comes with a different version of events.
Correct. And
more this is what is out
sorry,
there.
Sorry to interrupt you. Our time is limited. But the more significant issue also found serious breaches of the Public Finance Management Act in this whole process as well. And you've already alluded to issues surrounding that as well. So I'm sure you'd agree that this is a matter that should be dealt with urgently, and one can't necessarily wait for a commission of inquiry. If there is findings of breaches of the Public Finance Management Act, then surely criminal investigations should be taking place at this stage, or at the time when that report a year ago was forwarded to both the Hawks and the NPA in terms of the Public Protectors Act. And a year later, we see no action in that regard. Is that a concern to you?
Look, obviously, any misdemeanor or allegations of the sort that we have seen deserve action. They deserve to be taken up. I'm still hopeful that we will get to that point, as it were. But you're right. I mean, I could not, as a practitioner of governance, accept that misdemeanor or allegations of that nature can simply just, be circulated in the way that they are, without any consequence. So hopefully there will be consequence.
One last small question, and that is the meeting that Minister Zwane participated in Switzerland. Now, your experience as a Director General, would you find that extraordinary for a minister to go and visit and negotiate coal mining contracts overseas? Would that be something that would be against the norm of a cabinet minister engaging in that practice?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, and this is not a comment on the merits and the facts as they pertain to that particular instance, because I think what really matters is what has gone down in that instance. But ministers interact with all kinds of stakeholders. So ministers, when they travel, they'll interact with business people, they'll interact with government, their counterparts. So the fact that a minister has met a particular company in and of itself is not an issue. The issue is what what was that meeting about? And I've always, I've always taken that issue to be really about what was that meeting about.
Sure.
So
And if the prima facie evidence is that it is about finalizing the sale of Glencore's Optimum to Tegeta, then it could be a concern, obviously.
I noticed that it has been. I noticed that it has been flagged as a concern. I don't think I'm in a position to judge without full
Okay.
access to the facts.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. See, we're running out of time, but I will do it very short. Thank you very much. I just wanted a straight question, Mr. Montana, and ask you, were you at any stage under pressure to approve decisions that you feel uncomfortable as from the board side?
Yes, I've indicated that there was an instance in which the suggestion had been made for me to retain Collins Machila in the company, and I refused. I refused that suggestion.
Is that the only one that you can recall, or was there a second one?
I could no, that's the only one. That's the only one I can recall.
Do you, at any stage in your time as running the leadership of Eskom, take any instructions from a third party?
No.
What was your relationship with the minister itself?
The Minister of Public Enterprises?
Yeah, yes.
Oh yes, I overlapped with the minister for a few months, so she was my minister.
Yeah, no.
So I had a relationship with her.
Yeah, but what was it fine, or did you have any trouble with the minister, or did you get on well?
No, I got on well with minister.
Okay, and the chairman of the board?
I got on well with Solatsotsi. If you're talking about Solatsotsi,
Yes.
yes, I got on well with Solatsotsi.
The most serious thing always with being a CEO and running such a large company is the issue of tenders and procurement. That is, I think, very contentious. Did you, in your period running as a CEO, feel that you've been pressurized in any direction, a certain direction, when it comes to tenders?
Fortunately, in the 5 months that I was there, I did not have to deal with any specific procurement. The procurements that were underway had already been started by the time I arrived there, and if anything, they were reaching closure, so to speak. I have, of course, referred to what I saw as contestations and infighting about those tenders. So I did not have to deal with any procurement in my personal capacity as a CEO of the company.
Thank you.
Welcome, Honorable Khawla. Is it 10?
Thanks, Chair. It's on, but it's fine. Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Chair, let me also appreciate Mr. Matoma for coming to the inquiry. One, standing from a distance, Mr. Matoma, you indicated that you are Director General of Public Enterprise. And one will think that Eskom is an entity like other entities that falls under public enterprise. Now my curiosity will be, like I'm saying that I could be saying this from standing from a distance, will be that being a Director General of the public enterprise is far more senior than any leadership in the entity. I want to check what has been their interest. And also, if in your response you can also indicate from the time you were the Director General up to the time you were the CEO, what has been your experience on the interaction with the Gupta family?
I have had no interactions with the Gupta family that had anything to do with my position as a Director General. So I can't, unless you're referring to anything specific, I can't help you there. But I've had no dealings with the Guptas in relation to my position as a Director General.
I'm saying, being a Director General, now your interest going to see to be the CEO of Eskom as an entity, what could have informed that interest? Because one assumes that from a distance, being Director General, you are far more senior than the entity leadership.
So the opportunity to become the CEO of Eskom was a purely career issue on my part. You know, I have spent all my working life in the public sector. Needless to say, I have a history of political activism, so I'm very committed to our country. I'm very committed to the development and progress of our country. I've had a fairly successful, enriching career in departments that I have served under. The DTI gave me enormous exposure to our economy, to business, to what we should do, you know, what solutions we should deploy for various problems, unemployment, growth. And so going to Eskom was an extension of that career. I understood the company. I understood the challenges of the company. I thought that I could actually make a difference. I could actually assist with dealing with the issues, the challenges that confronted Eskom. I was, as it turns out, approached by the company that Eskom had appointed to run this, this recruitment. I thought about it. I went through the motions. I applied. I was interviewed. And of course I was appointed. And that was the process that I've described. You know, all the way to cabinet. I must add, you know, that my tenure as Director General in all the departments has been associated with clean audits. I have had clean audits in every one of the years that I've been a Director General, and I'm very proud of that. So I am a stickler when it comes to matters of governance. But that's really the career, you know, to go into another area, tackle a new challenge, and make a difference. That's really what my motivation was in ending up at Eskom.
Now, during the inquiry, one of the revelations that has come true is that there was a lot of monies that were used by Eskom through consultancies, which were management consulting. One of those companies was Trillion, which was subcontracted for management services, basically as a consultant. And I'm noting that on your appointment, one of the discoveries that you have pointed out were issues of leadership instability. And if you look at page 6, you are saying that you had your meeting where to stabilize the executives. Now I want to check if that meeting where you were looking at stabilizing the executives, has that yielded any fruits? And those fruits, what was their relation in terms of the fact that Eskom has been contracting trillion management services? Because one assumes that if you've got competent management, you'll then relieve the company from the consultant services of, in particular in management. Now, I just want to check whether the instability that you are referring to in terms of leadership, was it the source of the consultants that we had, and as a result of your arrival, has that then yielded any results which then relieve Eskom from the consultancies?
So I think there are two issues in relation to your question. I think the issue of management and leadership stability as an issue, I think it was something that I had to deal with, something that I needed to do. By the time I arrived at Eskom, a few people are acting in their positions, so I had to actually confirm them in their positions. I'm thinking, for example, of Dan Marukani, Machela Koko was acting as well in his position, and maybe one or two others. So that there had to be stability of management, and so that's an issue on its own, that we can engage with. Any organization that dealing with the challenges that Eskom was dealing with needed to have a stable leadership and stable management. The issue of consultants is a separate issue. In that, yes, one of the things I found was that Eskom had within it actually, embedded consultants, what I call embedded consultants. Just about every one of the major consultancies were at Eskom. And they were each producing report after report after report, which is why I said earlier on that there was no shortage of information about the problems of the company. The issue of curtailing consultants and consultant spend had come up. So part of the financial turnaround of the company involved cost cutting, identifying areas where to cut costs, and the use of consultants was one such area. So there had already in fact been decisions, and that thing was starting to be implemented at the time when I was there. Obviously, as you know, the engagement of Trillion are matters that happened after I left, so I can't quite comment on the rationale and the wisdom of those appointments.
Chair, I'm trying to couple my question to save time. My next question would be, I see under your suspension where you indicate the events that led to. I just want to check, because there's inconsistency in terms of the calling of meetings. There's one meeting that has been called by the board, I think starting from the 26th even up to the 29th one. And there was one meeting where you were given a notice to convene the meeting. I just want to check who is legitimately charged to convene meeting. The second other question that I want to ask in relation to that, the meeting was to deal, amongst other issues, which was additional, which was a resolution that leads to the inquiry, you see, which you were not privy to. Did you perhaps later find out the terms of reference of the inquiry? I hear now from the question that it was to deal with Denton, but I just want to check, at what stage did you then find out the terms of reference for the inquiry?
So the meeting that was called Sunday evening, I think it was through a company secretary. So usually board meetings are called by the company secretary. The company secretary is the one who will send out notices. So there was this notice that I picked up Sunday evening of that week, and attached to it was some kind of a resolution, a proposed resolution, talking about an inquiry. So the idea of an inquiry emerged at that time. So the meeting was fairly an urgent meeting for the next morning. In that meeting of the next morning, the chairperson Zola Tsotsi had a hard time explaining the rationale for that inquiry, and I think eventually made reference to the minister, saying that this was the minister supported this. To which other board members said, well, in that case, then the minister must come and address us directly. And that's how the meeting concluded. A day or so passes, and then another meeting is called, and it is in that meeting that the minister arrived. And of course, the events that I have subsequently spoken to and that are in my affidavit, the affidavit I filed in my action against Eskom.
Now that considering that the board had a difficulty with the meeting, and the meeting only proceeded after the meeting, the minister attended, so the meeting could only take the decision on the presence of the minister. Now, from your own experience as a DG and as a person that has been a practitioner, would you consider that the minister had acted arbitrarily, or has she abused her own power with the intention to push the Gupta-linked people? Or what has been then your view after you've realized that the minister, despite the resistance of the board, but the minister had insisted that the meeting must sit and the inquiry must be passed? Would you consider that the minister had abused her power or acted arbitrarily to favor the people that he had interest with?
No, there's nothing unusual in the minister requesting a meeting with the board, or with the minister being part of a board meeting. In an instance where the minister wants to convey a particular message to the board, the minister would surely call a meeting of the board to convey a particular message. So there was nothing unusual about, at least as far as I was concerned, about the minister calling a board or attending a board meeting as such. What was actually discussed in that meeting, and what the minister said, what were the nature of those deliberations of that meeting, I'm not privy to, because remember that I had been asked to recuse myself, so I don't know what the minister actually said to the board. I discovered that the minister did leave the meeting at some point in the course of the morning, so I can't quite tell how long the minister was there for and what was actually the substance of the discussions between the minister and the board.
It's my last one. Mr. Tsotsi, you have indicated during the you're sorry, Mr. Matoma. My apologies. Yeah, Mr. Matoma, my apologies. You have indicated that there was no wrongdoing proven on your side. So that means your labor rights were infringed, because you have taken the matter to Labour Court, and the Labour Court then referred the matter to CCMA just to establish the merits. And during that space of time, Eskom then offered a handshake. Now, what would you attribute the pressure to a point that even your own labor rights could be contravened? What would you attribute those? Because it means you were an obstruction to whatever project that was sought to be achieved. So would you then attribute such a pressure to the influence of outside forces such as the Guptas, where you had to even have your rights being contravened just because of you were obstructing whatever project that the minister and whoever that she was linked with, which in the main, which is proven now that it was the Guptas? What would you attribute your removal, even to a point of being given money just to walk out, even though you have not done any wrongdoing? What has been your own view?
No, I couldn't, without any factual information, blame it upon the Guptas and say, you know, it is the Guptas. Obviously, the name of the Guptas in relation to Eskom is out there. It, it's possible that that was the source of all of those things that happened. I can't be sure. I am equally interested in what this inquiry will establish as anybody else. What I can point to is matters of, if you like, inconsistency or curious events, such as, you know, the fact that a new board arrives and the first order of business of that board is to suspend me and 3 other executives. That much I'm aware of. I have not been able to interrogate or question any of those board members as to exactly where this came from. You will recall that the chairperson of the board at the time, who you unfortunately mistaken me for, and I forgive you, Mr. Tsotsi, made pronouncements in the media. So a lot of these things are things which I know in the media. I read in the media, you know, why he did that. And I'm sure you're aware of that. I'm sure the committee is aware of that. So I would hesitate to make any speculation whatsoever about exactly what the motives might have been. Thank you.
You're welcome. Honorable Shivambu, it's your turn now.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I think before I come to the questions, we should, as the committee, resolve to communicate to the people whose names are being mentioned here that a time will come for them to come and give their side of the story. I think that is the principal agreement that we had when we started with the inquiry. Because I noticed in some of the newspaper reports that Brian Molefe, Machela Kuku are saying this process is not fair because they are being mentioned and all of those things. And they do not have an opportunity to present their side of the story. I think we should state categorically as the committee that a time will come for them to come and explain their side of the story in terms of the issues that arise here. We're not that stupid as the committee could just write reports without even giving them an opportunity to present their side of the story. I think that is one of the things that we must clarify upfront so that people do not drive an unnecessary, wasteful public campaign against this process that we're engaged in now. Now, you were appointed in 2014 as the GCEO of Eskom. And then in December, a new board is appointed by Minister Lynn Brown. And he said earlier that the manner in which the Department of Public Enterprises appoint board members was that you have got a database of those people who get appointed into boards. Are you aware if any of those new board members that were appointed by Minister Brown were in the database of the Department of Public Enterprises?
No, I'm not aware.
I think that as part of this process, Chair, we should go and check if the Department of Public Enterprises had the names of the people who were appointed in December. And then which meeting suspended you? Is the first meeting of the new board that suspended you upon their arrival, or they had other engagements before they suspended you?
Yes, so they were going through inductions largely. So they were appointed December, January, February. They were getting inducted into the business. They hadn't necessarily held a full board. They hadn't really held a full board meeting, a normal board meeting, except for the one that the two close meetings that I refer to in my affidavit. Those, in a sense, are the first formal board meetings. You could argue.
So the process is that people get appointed in December, and when they're being inducted in terms of what is Eskom, where does it come from, what are the challenges, then they decide to suspend you and other executives in Eskom. Is that what happened?
Yes.
And then after that, then they start the process. What did the letter that suspended you say? That what was the reason? Like, who signed it, and what did it say you're suspended for?
I actually have a copy of the letter, but it referred to the need for an inquiry, and the fact that whilst the inquiry is underway, yeah. So yeah, it says that I was advised on the nature and extent of the inquiry, and that I was afforded an opportunity to make representations to the board subcommittee, which I obviously contested. I mean, it was an ambush, so to speak, so I couldn't have made reasonable representations for the board to eventually come to a conclusion that they're justified in suspending me, and that in view of the serious nature of the concerns, the challenges facing the company regrets to inform you that it has decided to suspend me on full pay without any loss of benefits to be calculated from today pending the completion of the inquiry. In order for the investigation to proceed as expeditiously as possible, it would not be appropriate for you to remain at work while such an investigation is in place. You will be advised of the outcome of the inquiry as soon as possible. So it was all about this inquiry. Yeah.
That's fine. And then you say that there were infights with regards to procurement in boards. Which board meetings had these infights? And you specifically said that there were infights around procurement on Arriva, on T-Systems, and the New Age breakfast. What was the nature of the fight? Who was saying what there? What was the bone of contention? What were the issues that were being raised in the process of fighting around that particular procurement?
So there is a board tender committee to which the CEO is not a member. So in fact, that was the arrangement. You know, the Eskom governance structures are such that there is a body at executive level where senior executives, they constitute the procurement, and so they will deal with all technical issues with regard to procurement. Then they feed into a board tender committee. I think that's what it's called. So these matters were all already at board tender committee level, and the issues in contestations, in debate, were the merits upon which one or the other recommendation or award, or who should be awarded the tender. Those were the issues. In the case of T-Systems, whether it should be T-Systems or somebody else. In the case of the Arriva, the steam generator, the nuclear issue, whether it should be Arriva or Westinghouse. So typically those would be the sort of issues. But I can't be completely precise because I wasn't sitting in those things. But I could pick up, via some of the officials who were present in those meetings, in those debates, that those are the issues, and so some of them were getting drawn out. So there could never be any confusion. So those processes were just going on and on because of these sort of differences and infights within the board.
Did you confirm earlier that the letter was signed by Mr. Zola Tsotsi?
Yes, certainly.
Because he ultimately left, and then Mr. Ben Kubane came into Eskom as chair. And the dominant narrative which he had always presented when he came to this committee was that the load shedding, which had started in November 2014, was ended by Brian Molefe. Is that the case? Like, do you think that Brian Molefe, if you had remained there yourself as Eskom GCEO, you're going to fail to stabilize Eskom and end the load shedding?
If I ever thought that I couldn't achieve that objective of ending load shedding, I would have left Eskom on my own. I'm not the one to take on impossible jobs. It was a difficult job. It was challenging, but the solutions were there. We could see the light as to where we should be going in resolving that issue, and we were making gains. We were making steady gains. By the time I left, by the way, we had commissioned the first unit of Mitupi power station. It had been commissioned because we had applied pressure to the contractors that were building that station to say we are no longer going to entertain any delays whatsoever, and so we put them really on terms, and so we were able to deliver that. So I'm confident that I would have turned around the situation. It was only a matter of time. Unfortunately, I was not given that opportunity.
So this narrative that load shedding could only be ended by Brian Molefe is nonsense. Is that the case? Because every time we saw that there's this golden boy of the Guptas who's going to stabilize Eskom. So you are saying that you could have done it even if there was no Brian Molefe there?
I repeat myself, I was confident that I would overcome that problem. Remember, Brian Molefe, and I don't want to take anything away from Brian. Brian and I are colleagues. We all grew up in the public service. We joined more or less at the same time. So it's someone that I know and I have regard to. But he could not have done that alone. He arrived there, found a team, found plans, found the team fighting this war, and sure, yeah, he achieved the objective. So I don't think Brian would himself claim to have any exceptional capabilities. Someone told me actually Brian acknowledged the work that had been done before he arrived. So there's no issue there, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way. This is not a competition between myself and Brian. I think he arrived at his he arrived at a particular point in time and dealt with the issues that he dealt with at that point in time. I was there during my own time, and I dealt with the issues that I dealt with in that time, and I don't think that there's any basis for comparison.
And then you say that your reasons for departure was because you did not want to be bankrupted by huge legal costs, fighting Eskom, people who were determined to get rid of you and everything else there. Are you able to disclose the amount of the settlement that you had with Eskom?
It was never a secret, as a matter of fact, because it was actually not a golden handshake. It was a handshake, but there was no gold in it. I got the equivalent of 12 months of my salary. So it's just about a year. I tried to negotiate for better. And sometimes when I saw some of the numbers coming after I'd left, I feel that maybe I should have fought a little bit harder for more.
And then I saw a news report that says that Mr. Jacob Zuma later on apologized to you. Is that the case? Did he apologize? What did he say happened? And what were the circumstances in terms of the whole developments around Eskom?
That's what the newspaper wrote, that the president apologized. That's not actually quite factual. So the president didn't call me and say, sorry, I'm sorry about what happened. And I am at a bit of a difficulty in disclosing the contents of a meeting of that nature, as it were. So, if you indulge me, I will not be able to do so. All I can say is that I have been part of this government. I have the president has been my leader, my manager. So I interact with the president. I interact with ministers, and from time to time, I do have meetings with the president. I do have meetings with ministers. Here is Minister Gordon here. He knows we have had meetings as part of the normal functioning of government. So at the time, I was at home, and I think it was about what career options are there for me. So I just want to say that having served in this government for a long time, almost from the beginning, it was difficult to fight against my own government, even as painful as it was what had happened. But the idea of me fighting an institution that I have helped to build, you know. So I've invested a lot in this government in terms of where we've come from up to this point, and this government has invested a lot in me. And so it was about how we leverage of that, really.
But now, in hindsight, last question, don't you think that it would have been much more noble to could fight for proper governance and stability of Eskom? If you look back at what has happened to Eskom now, if my numbers are not wrong, I think it has got a guaranteed debt of 350 billion rands, which, if the lenders withdraw, will collapse the entire fiscus. There is a lot of irregularities. The state, at some stage, we intervened, I think with about 29 billion. The state had to dispose of its stake in Vodacom in order to bail out Eskom. There's lots of wrong things that are happening in Eskom. Don't you think, in hindsight, that it would have been noble to fight for governance, like for against those who are flouting governance principles and rules, in protection of the same thing that you're saying you are patriotic too. Don't you think that it would have been much more noble to fight against the what I think what will later on characterize as the one of the manifestations of state capture?
Of course, I was always going to fight. The nature of the fight obviously didn't have to be necessarily through the courts. I believe that for as long as I live in this country, and for as long as it turns out, I continue to be a public servant, I will work for the good of this country and overcoming some of these challenges. I did not know at the time that I will end up in a position of influence, such as the one I have right now as Secretary of Planning, where I'm able to deal with the same issues from a different vantage point, from a point of saying how do we as a country reset, how do we press the reset button in relation to some of the things that we're reading about. So there is always an opportunity that will present itself for a good person, for a revolutionary. There will always be another opportunity to fight. So as we say, sometimes, leave it for tomorrow, retreat in order to come back tomorrow when you are a little bit stronger, because whilst I was alone and it felt a bit lonely at the time, perhaps now it's no longer the case. Perhaps now it's no longer the case. Perhaps the range of interest and the range of forces that can actually make a difference is now there. So I think we have a real possibility to turn things around, to turn the corner.
No, thank you very much, Chair and Mr. Matuna. Just quickly, as a parting shot, is that most people who fold their arms, particularly freedom fighters who fold their arms, it has been proven, particularly from liberation movements, things degenerate. It starts one by one, and before you know it, the whole country have degenerated, because you've got that hope in tomorrow, that tomorrow will be better than today. It's not always the case. Sometimes an opportunity may be deprived forever for you to fight back, and when you look back, the country will be gone completely. That is one of the things I'm sure at a different discussion we'll have. Sure.
Thank you. Honorable Kungubele, it's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Dadamatul, there are few questions I'm going to raise, but I just want to pose this question. The challenges or the trends that Eskom was degenerating, at what point did you observe them, or if you ever observed them? If you ever observed them? Because there's a point where you were a TG, Eskom being one of the entities, like the other member said. Later you got closer to Eskom as CEO. Maybe the question is it there a time where you generally looked at Eskom and saw that things were not moving in the right direction? If you did observe that, at what time? Is it the time when you were DG or when you're CEO?
I think it was a bit when I was at DG.
Something with regard to that period.
So, we occasionally in that position dealt with instances where, executives of state-owned companies were engaged in practices that I don't think anybody would be proud of, which speak to responsibility, the extent to which they exercise the responsibility for due care of assets that they had responsibility over. So in a general sense,
What I want you to do, because you were primarily a technical employee rather than a political one.
yeah,
They must be specific. If you observe, your eyes are not like mine. You know, as a politician, it's enough for me to say jobs are not being created. But for you, it's bigger than that in terms of T10. At a point where you observe that things were moving in the right direction, if you can speak up one specific thing which made you, in concrete terms, which made you to think like
so it's a few isolated things. One day we wake up with a big Sunday Times story about monies that had been spent on a Christmas party, like lavish, expenditure, and you look at it and you say, this, we can't be proud of this. So it's such to speak.
that. Sorry, at times I forgive for appearing to be rude. Those are observations from newspapers and so on. I'm moving from a point that says, as a DG, we had a technical responsibility. All those people reporting to you internally from your direct responsibility as a DG, what is it that you observed if there was no Sunday newspaper?
Let me just say that the governance space tended to be a bit murky. So it was only when I got.
Can you be specific there? Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
If you're a chief director, sometimes there are directors reporting to you. There are various types of report based on monitoring your M&Es, based on your KPIs that you have put in place, based on regular reports, governance imperatives, regular reports being given and being of particular quality and so on. Surely in that space, that is where your primary responsibility was. And I'm saying, for you to be convinced that things are moving in the right direction, Sunday Times can give a wrong report. I just want you to speak like somebody who was a technical head, who said, I was there, I looked at the technicalities of the environment, and at that point, that development gave me an idea as I was looking at the reports being given to me. One specific example.
So typically, for example, something which starts to give you a sense is irregular expenditure, or what the Auditor General.
Unity where it was happening.
I mean, Eskom. In fact, all state-owned
Which
companies.
year?
Over the years, every year, watch that number of irregular expenditure. It fluctuates, and so sometimes when you go into it, you actually find that it's because of lapses in regard to procurement and the governance of procurement. So, so from the shareholder oversight point of view, that would be the thing that really is worrisome. But as I said, when I went to Eskom, the one thing that was burning at the time was this TNA, the TNA thing that had ripped that board apart. They were divided over the issue, fighting over it. An inquiry was done. I think it was by SNG, which established that actually there was wrong.
What were the results?
So the board of, now I was part of that board now, so we were dealing with this thing, and our view was that there has to be consequences, and so we were actually in the process of engaging legal advice as to what are the options that the board has in terms of corrective action in respect of that issue. There was also, of course, the IRBA matter that was there, because the auditors had also picked it up as an issue.
You know, I am trying to take this line that Makoko now. You were said, so now I'm calling you Koko. That's a mistake. You know, I'm raising these issues. There are guys who are still coming here, who some were directly responsible, who keep on saying what we're doing here is nonsense, doesn't make sense. Now it's important that you were there, so that I have a sense that as a DG that time, as a technical head that time, you did play your role in more concrete terms. Now, the other question I have is, it may sound like an abstract question. Actually, it's linked, I think, to Honorable Shivam. What during your era as a CEO, what tough choices were put before you?
Sorry, as a CEO, what tough choices?
Honorable Shivamba was asking a question. Wasn't there a fight which you were supposed to put? You answered it in a particular way. And I'm saying now, in that very vein, what facing those challenges as a CEO, what tough choices did it put before you in the interest of this country?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understand the question, so I'm going to respectfully ask you to.
Did you either fight or submit? I'm asking in that context. In your situation, were you put in that situation where you had to make these tough choices?
In the aftermath of my suspension, if that's what you're talking about, absolutely tested. Sorry, I think you want to explain your question because I.
Were you ever approached at some stage by the minister, Matuna, to say to you, a certain lady who is a director of finance, Tsulufelo Mulefe, is refusing to give businesses to Gupta-linked companies? Were you ever approached for that purpose?
No.
I'm deliberately interrogating your managerial responsibilities, your managerial imperatives, because in 2010 you were already a DG of Public Enterprise, am I correct?
Yes.
During that period, Gupta would have approached Brian Dames with regard to the Letabo supplying coal to the Letabo power station. And of course, Letabo power stations were already had a secured contract of long term and competitive price. Were you aware of that?
No. I don't know if that's the one that I knew that by the time I arrived at Eskom, there was some negotiation with a coal supply by a company linked to the Guptas. That was in the.
Company was that?
I can't remember. But all I know was that there were price issues, there were quality issues, there were compliance issues that were making that difficult for Eskom at the time.
Let me come quickly to say, were you aware of the approach by Guptas to supply coal general to Eskom, which threatened the nature of contracts which were in existence at that time? Just generally, were you aware of that?
I was aware that there was a contract that was under negotiation. I was not aware what the implication of that contract would have been for other suppliers. So again, it is a process and a negotiation that I was not necessarily directly part of.
What was your date of resignation in March, of departure in March?
I think it is the 15th. I may be wrong. 11. I'll tell you now. Actually, it's in the letter. 11th of March.
there is a record of signing of contract with Brackfontein coal mine by Gupta to supply coal to Eskom in March. Surely, if it was signed in March, negotiation must have been taking place for some time. For instance, those negotiations would have started in May 2014, where your technical guys would have actually dismissed in terms of unsuitability. Again, 2014 September, again your technical guys would have dismissed because of non-compliance with the environment and so on. And you get appointed around October. And finally, this thing gets signed in March. It means it took place also during your CEO period. Do you want to share anything you know about it with us? As a CEO now.
Yes. So the executive who was engaged with that negotiation, the technology, commercial and technology, actually turned out to be Machela Koko. So he was
Reporting to you.
He was reporting to me. So he, because it had been going on, so he kept me in the loop. He kept me in the loop about what was going on and what were the issues. And as I indicated, there were three issues. There was a price issue, there was a quality issue, and there were compliance issues. And I said to him, well, if you can't fix those things, fix those things if you can. If you can't fix those things, then there's no contract.
Aware that these negotiations post your departure would have led immediately after, especially after the appointment of alleged Gupta-linked board. Those negotiations led to this mine supplying 75,000 tons per month, later 100,000, later 200,000 tons per month, longer contract than other suppliers and at a higher price. Time post the time you departed. There's a question I'm going to ask, that's why I'm raising this.
I read about that.
You don't know whether that is truth or not.
No, it's what I.
But that's a fact now in terms of the protocol. Oh, the point I'm asking is, you know why I'm asking this, is that from your responsibility as a principal manager for governance imperatives, was it not proper if a contract is negotiated in May, your scientists say it's not suitable, further in September, you were not there, I know. Your scientists say it's not suitable. Naturally, there must be facts why they are saying that. At what point as a CEO were you supposed to say stop these negotiations? Because surely they were leading to this situation post your departure.
I don't think I had a sense of when that negotiation had been coming from. So I know it was ongoing at the time, so I had no sense of where it was going, you know how far it goes back. But it was clear that it was not going to be possible, because if the rules say you can only contract with mines that comply, and your technical requirements say that you can only use coal of a particular specification, and if the price is not right, then, as I said, I was comfortable that there would be no deal unless those issues were addressed, and it was an ongoing negotiation. So I wasn't party to the negotiation.
The significant amount of money is involved. Don't you think they dictated your closeness to those contracts? So is that from risk management, you were able to deal with it before it leads to where it is now?
No, I don't think so. I think eventually these things tie up at the board level. So the thing about the structures that Eskom had put in place is that they they removed the CEO from the coal phase of procurement negotiations, because you are going to have your turn in the approval at the right structure, at the right level, which is at board level. So you need not necessarily be involved with these processes. Let me say that that was the structure that existed there. In some ways, in retrospect, I'm happy that, because I didn't have to arbitrate these procurements directly myself. But I had concern about being completely removed and not necessarily having direct line of sight of these processes. And I was contemplating, what is the best way of managing that, perhaps maybe changing that so that I have some role. So other than from just getting updates about how each negotiation is going, I was not hands-on on those.
You know what worries me about your management? I'll be very difficult to ask closure, deliberate and democratic. Not that I suspect you for anything. You see, I want to be convinced that you were a threat to this situation with your leadership. Because one, in his naughty way of thinking, will say, after this fight between yourself and the board, what led to your reappointment in government? Where was this leniency and this considerate behavior by government come from? I'm deliberating so that you can actually acquit yourself if you so care. I'm saying to you, the bailout came around February, am I correct?
Yes.
You were CEO since October the previous year. Surely, there are underlying factors which led to the bailout. And there was this negotiation of this major contract. And each time your officials reached a view of unsuitability in May and September, there must have been a record. This is not an ordinary contract. I'm not sure, it's not unreasonable to expect that the CEO must have known this threat in terms of risk management.
Not as it related to the specific contract, not as it related to the specific negotiation. Sure, risk management is dealt with at board level. There is a structure in the board, I think the Audit and Risk Committee of the board, that has got the responsibility to identify risks. And again, in that context, some of these things surface, not necessarily as direct negotiations. So the fact that I was not dealing with this matter in the context of a procurement process did not necessarily mean that I did not have a chance, or there was no other opportunity to deal with it from a risk management point of view.
Do you believe that there's a role you could have played during your time to prevent this from happening? I accept that you had to leave in March, but during your time, look at the nature and the weight of these developments.
So to prevent what from happening specifically?
Alarms on time, that's the point I want to make to you. Because these things happened during your CEO period, and they led to what it is now: higher price than the previous suppliers, longer contract with this supplier than normally used to be done. You can go on all the advantages and even the volumes. And these negotiations took place during your period. And I'm saying, don't you think, in fairness, there is your closer link with the detail could have led to you sounding an alarm?
No, certainly. I mean, if I had been directly involved and I had access to all of the information when it started, when this negotiation started, what are the issues? If I was closer at hand, probably I would have put an end to them, as it were. So what I knew was that the negotiations were still ongoing, and by the way, this was one of several other negotiations. So Eskom is constantly in negotiation. So, so there would be no upfront grounds why one would target a particular negotiation. At least in the time that I was there, I did not see that there was any need for me to intervene, because it was clear, if it doesn't meet our price, it doesn't meet our quality, if it doesn't comply, it ain't happening.
My last question to close is that, yes, thank you. It's my last. I'm saying, I want to put this question to you, Rematun, is that if I listen to your answers and you were reporting to me, either being a board or a minister, you are saying to expect you as my CEO to be the pulse measure of this possible problem would be unfair. And if you so agree, should I attach this to systems that are poor, or maybe to gaps in your management as a CEO?
Look, I was operating within a specific institutional framework that which I found there, and I say that again. No, it simply excluded the CEO from direct engagement and arbitration of procurement. And by the way, this applies to departments as well. DGs don't arbitrate directly. They allocate specific function to relevant people in accordance with the prescript, as it were. Of course, you take accountability for the outcomes, and you take accountability if things go wrong, no doubt about that. But you don't, you ain't sitting there arbitrating procurement as a CEO or as a DG. That's been my experience.
So at a CEO level,
Your last take.
there's this response.
We are really pressed with time. Really. Thank you very much, members, and thank you very much, Mr. Montana, for Matuna. Thank you very much for affording us this time to come before the portfolio committee, and we are very much appreciated of that, and your contribution that you have made in this committee surely is going to assist the committee in understanding the workings of Eskom during your tenure. And once again, thank you very much, and have a safe journey. At this juncture, members who are pressed with time, we're now going to be having our second session that will be interacting with Ms. Johnson. I believe that she's around. Please, ma'am, please come forward and take a seat. And
Chair, while we're waiting for Ms. Johnson,
yes,
can I suggest that arising from our interaction with Mr. Matona, that we, through the evidence leader, put Mr. Sotsi and Ms. Klein on notice, number one. Number two, obtain the diesel contracts or copies thereof, if need be, at the outset, subpoena them so our time is not wasted. Number three, the memos referred to by Mr. Matona on board appointments. I believe the minister has been requested to give them to us. We don't have them. Can we subpoena those, please, as well? And the Denton's report as well. Thank you.
noted. Noted. I will deal with that. Are you ready, ma'am? Or okay.
Chairperson.
I thought when we sum up towards the end, after the second interaction, then we'll come back to those. Yes,
Chair, just so that we have it on record, it must be the unredacted Denton's report, because we have the redacted one, which has 90% of the pages blanked out. So it must be the unredacted original Denton's report, please.
I thought Honorable Gordon was agreeing with you at the end. You still want to?
Just quickly, In terms of the timing, I'm not supposed to go to plenary now at 2. I'll go, for how long am I going to go with this presentation and the whole question process and everything else there?
Yes, we are, but we are supposed to go to the House. But members really, I indicated earlier on that we are pressed with time. We have two interactions, we have two witnesses, but members took their own time and I did not want to suffocate them. But this time really we are going to be very strict. Thank you. I get an indication. Now members, you are delaying me further. I get an indication
Just not my apology. Yeah, not my apology.
Now, okay. Now I'm getting an indication that we can do this one within the hour. So we'll be able to finish. Thank you. Can we proceed now?
No, that's fine. They will accept my apology because I'm a chief whip. I must prepare for plenary.
No,
so
that's fine.
That's fine.
Thanks.
But our member is going to remain.
Your
But
member
also
will
an
remain
apology
here.
for the whole week because I'm attending a Marxism conference.
Your
elsewhere.
apology is accepted. Thank you. Write it down. Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, and we apologize for the delays. I understand that you've been here for quite some time, and there was an accident. I don't know whether you were here earlier when we did. Oh, thank you very much. You heard our apologies. Hence, we are calling you right now. There is a. I believe that you have I believe that you have opted to have an oath, and I'm going to read that to you. And I also believe that you do have a copy that indicates you how to respond at the end. If not, I think the copy is on the way. You members want to stretch just a few seconds. Okay. Sorry about that.
So cool. After love. Oh, maybe. Ufika ngoku lo ufika bafika izolo wemgabho wabaleka uma economic refugee uyaphinda uyabuya gosh asisiya sisalwa thina it's such a big problem. No, yes, it is. If you take it seriously, it's that you I mean, high moment. So why should I invite? No wonder. Yeah. ebizayibuza ebizawufuna sibuyela ukuthi bayibuza kwaba
Apha xa ifune nalapha ne-threshold ungabiza umntu utshayela apho somebody with steering
dealing with the oath. I believe, ma'am, you have received a copy now. Thank you very much. I'll read out to you. Can I have a quiet meeting, please? Can I have one meeting? Whatever we are doing, can we do it quietly so that we don't disturb the proceedings of the meeting? In accordance with Section 16 of the Powers, Privileges and Immunities of Parliament and Provincial Legislature Act 2004, as a witness to this oversight inquiry, please be informed that by law, you are required to answer fully and satisfactorily all the questions lawfully put to you, or to produce any document that you are required to produce in connection with the subject matter of the inquiry. Notwithstanding the fact that the answer or the document could incriminate you or expose you to criminal or civil proceedings or damages. You are, however, protected in that evidence given under oath or affirmation before a house or committee may not be used against you in any court or place outside Parliament, except in criminal proceedings concerning a charge of perjury or a a charge relating to the evidence or documents required in these proceedings. Please be aware that in terms of Section 17(2) of the Powers, Privilege and Immunities of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act, a person willfully furnishes a house or committee with information or makes a statement before it which is false or misleading, commits an offense and is liable to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 2 years. You are required to take an oath or affirm that the evidence you are about to give is truthful. You may choose to take the oath. I believe you have chosen to take the oath. The oath, I swear that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
Thank you very much. Advocate. It's your time to make a
Thanks,
statement.
Chair. Ms. Johnson, we do not have time, but that shouldn't be a challenge. You have made a statement, and that statement has been distributed to members, and it contains some of the issues that you will testify on. I want us to just, for the record, identify yourself and the position you occupied at Eskom at the time you resigned. I know you've got quite a long experience. We don't have time for that. If you can just zoom.
Thank you, Advocate. My position at the time I left Eskom was Group Executive Enterprise Development. That meant I was accountable for the corporate affairs, effectively, of the company. So strategy and risk, communications, reputation, internal sort of group matters, and risk and resilience.
Let's zoom to communications. The breakfast shows. I know the Chief Information Officer at the time reported directly to you. Was that correct?
Yes, the CIO did report to me, and definitely the communications stakeholder management department did as well. Yes.
Can you share your knowledge with the committee around the 43 million contract entered into by one Mr. Colin Machila with the owners of TNA Breakfast, and how the board dealt with the report from Sizwe Nsaluba Kobodo on the matter?
So in April 2014, Colin Majila became the interim CEO of Eskom. Mr. Majila, on assuming his new role as moving from the board to the executive, had requested a sponsorship for the new age. Initially, he asked for 1 year's worth of contract, and at that time it was about 1.2 million rand per breakfast event. He requested this to the head of the corporate affairs section, the communications section, stakeholder management, and the head of legal, and they were then dealing with trying to put together a contract. I became involved when they told me about it, and raised the issue about the rationale. It's asking for 12 for 1 year contract. It was in a time when we were financially constrained, and that's and we tried to accommodate this request. When we had a new CEO, it was a different time. We were expecting to set a tone, and we felt that if the CEO is asking for this because he'd like to follow a particular choice in how he wanted to highlight the strategic challenges facing the company, that's what we were trying to support. As matters went on, time went on, within that month of April, the request shifted from a 1 year contract to a 3 year contract. And the head of legal was involved in, because there was a request to have the exit clause removed. And our challenge at the time is that we were expecting the permanent CEO to come in October, and we felt that we would have liked to give the permanent CEO also the opportunity on how they would like to manage conversations around the challenges facing Eskom without being bound into a 3 year, once a month breakfast conversation. And that's why we were raising the issue. At a year's contract, I believe the delegation of authority allows the CEO to sign it. But a 3-year contract means it needs 2 signatories. And the FD at the time refused to sign it. And the interim CEO went ahead and signed the contract. And this was then picked up in October, November 2014, after our half-yearly audits as an irregular activity. And the board audit and risk committee obviously was where this matter was then being discussed, and they raised the issue, and it was eventually reported to IRBA as an irregular expenditure. It was basically signing for a contract beyond your delegation of authority. That was the issue around communications, as you say.
Let's move to the procurement of the IT system. Not IT system, the information technology system.
So it was a contract for IT applications and maintenance support. It's basically your IT service provider who enables you to run your applications and maintains all your IT systems functioning. So the contract is renewed periodically, and in 2011, when the new board tender committee was established, I mean, one of the things that they'd asked for was a commodity sourcing strategy for all commodities in the company. One of it would be IT, and that's where the entire strategy around IT was reviewed. We also had a new CIO appointed at the time, so new vision, and saying we can see how we can actually manage the IT contracting differently. And so there were two changes. We had clear view of what we wanted to have as under internal control, because it's of a strategic nature, like cybersecurity, or you could commoditize things like managing laptop peripherals, for example, by an outside party. So that's the nature of the contract. And then, as the contract was then progressed, it went out to, it was approved by Exco, it was approved by board as a strategy. It went out onto tender in December 2013. And what was concerning to me was then, just as we were about to go towards adjudication, there was a lot of concern around elements of the contract. There were always elements of it being challenged, whether the savings that was being proposed was correct, that was audited, or whether the clauses that were being established, for example, setting certain standards for the service provider to deliver, an ISO 27000 standard, for example, was that fair? So there were individual questions always being raised around this IT applications and maintenance contract. And so that was quite a bit of noise coming up as we were heading towards adjudication.
The Chief Information Officer, I'm advised that in his strategy, developed and this strategy would have saved Eskom R1 billion. And my understanding is that this strategy was subjected to numerous reviews by the board tender committee. But all these reports came back to confirm and verified that indeed, if properly implemented, this strategy could have saved Eskom R1 billion. Can you speak to the committee around that?
That is correct. That particular element, as I said, was audited at least twice. Once just on its own to say whether the veracity of the saving was proven, and then the second time round when there was an audit around in the CIO's integrity and then what he was placing on the table. So it was twice it was audited, and in both cases it was confirmed that by the nature in which you were changing the way in which IT services were provided, the savings were true.
T-Systems was the service provider at the time, but its contract was coming to an end, and the procurement was to replace the current service provider. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is it also correct that during the procurement process, T systems had not made the cut? In other words, they were disqualified from the process.
That is true. In the first part of the year, as we were approaching adjudication, they had not made the shortlist.
What happened then at the end of the contract?
So at the end of the contract, which is December 2014, but a number of events had happened leading up to that point. So firstly, at the end of October, 3 bidders were chosen out of the shortlist to engage with in a final negotiations. T-Systems was not part of that shortlist. So that's end of October. And that was board approval, board tender committee approval to the team to go ahead and negotiate. In November, Eskom had a major incident, and they lost the silos at Majuba power station, and they lost output of one entire power station, leading to quite deep load shedding for a month. In that time period, there was a lot of concern then from the executives about changing an IT system in the following year. And their decision at the end of December, when that contract was due, with the T-Systems as a service provider contract was due to end, they decided to cancel the procurement process and extend with T-Systems for a period of time on a disengagement clause for 2 years, at least 2 years.
The load shedding, in your view, it appeared that there was an emergency that prompted it, but in your view, was it reason enough not to proceed appointing the new service provider?
There are parts of the key nature of the applications that are critical to daily operations, so I can understand the concern from executives. The question is just, when do you expect the load shedding to normalize versus renewing a long-term contract? I think, to me, that's the key decision. So I can understand that the company was in distress at that period of time. It is a very hard thing to do, load shedding, and it takes a lot of mental energy. At the same time, trying to change a contract, but in this case, though, it was an IT contract which has a bit of distance between some of the daily operations, and I think that there are elements of it which are understandable. The question was, how long did you expect the load shedding to last?
Lastly, the understanding of your statement is that there was pressure exerted on the CIO, who had come with a strategy to save Eskom R1 billion, to have him suspended. And actually, when you left, he was eventually suspended and eventually left the company. Can you comment about that?
That is correct. In June, I was requested by the interim CEO, Colin Majila, to consider suspending the CIO, around allegations again, around 6 allegations. I reviewed the matter and looked at the precedent in the company and said, in terms of reputation, that I believe that this was not a sensible thing to do. And I had asked for Sal Laher's support in engaging with the investigation, and he had assured me that he would. So I had chosen not to, and I initiated the audit that the CEO had requested of me. I left at end of October, and in my closeout report to the permanent CEO, who at that point now was Tsidiso Matona, I handed him the audit report and gave him the closeout, which then found that all the findings, that all the matters were satisfactorily dealt with. There was no evidence of any challenges or problems. And so, as far as I was concerned, I thought the matter had been closed. But in November, Eskom merged 2 departments, IT technology, so information technology, and engineering technology, and put them together. And by the time, in the beginning of December, apparently the similar allegations arose, and cell was suspended at that point, and the CIO was suspended at that point, and they never came back to the company.
No further questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Members? No other. I'm going to close this list. Honorable Mazone, Honorable Swart, Honorable Khaula, Honorable Gungubele, Honorable PG, Honorable Gordon. Yeah, the last. The list is closed. Thank you very much. In that order, members?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witness for availing yourself. You specifically are focusing on 4 areas. That's the New Age deal, the IT procurement, the procurement process of the Koeberg steam generators, and any other related matters. But those don't seem to take up too much time in your statement that you've given us. When you say about the Koeberg steam generator specifically, you say that you became aware of the anxiety of the team leading the procurement process to replace the generators, and that they were anxious that they wouldn't get them replaced by 2016, 2017. Now, we've heard from other people saying how maintenance programs were being rolled out, things were being planned. Why do you think there was this anxiousness if things had been planned properly? I mean, what caused this anxiousness that they wouldn't be on time?
So the way in which the Koeberg nuclear power station is operated is that you maintain an alignment, equipment alignment with other nuclear operators globally. So that the key anxiety was that we wanted to maintain the equipment alignment by the time periods when other people had changed out similar pieces of equipment. So that was the key principle by which they were maintaining their prudent operating practices. So that was the key issue. And yeah.
So you said that other people had changed the alignment.
No. Nuclear power stations, in terms of their licensing, maintain similar operating equipment alignment. So if you change one piece of equipment here, you would change it similarly, similar age at another power station. And that's the alignment we wanted to maintain at Koeberg.
All right.
With other nuclear operators globally.
Okay, so you wanted to keep a global standard going.
The alignment with other operators, yes.
Okay, that's fine. When you reported it to the board audit and the risk committee, when the implications of this delay became known to you, was the reaction what you expected? Was it not what you expected? Do you think that more should have been done? Do you think that the actions taken were in line with the seriousness of the nature?
When this was raised in July 2014 with the board audit and risk, I think after that, certainly there was a faster movement towards concluding. But prior to that, there'd been at least a year where the team could not conclude their procurement process. That was time wasted.
Time wasted. Okay. If I could just take you back then quickly to the New Age deal, because this is something that, I mean, it concerns a lot of us greatly. Within a month of Colin Majila becoming the CEO, he had requested a sponsorship for the 1-year New Age deal that amounted to 1.2 million rand per breakfast. Let me tell you, I'm expecting some serious food for 1.2 million rand at a breakfast event. You were involved in terms of the rationale for the contract. Can you just unpack that for me? Because I don't understand exactly what you mean when you say rationale.
So 1.2 million rand is a lot of money for a corporate media event. There's no doubt that is a lot of money. And this would have been a 14.4 million rand contract for a year. That was a huge portion of the corporate budget, communications budget. So we were being requested by the new interim CEO to engage with this is how he would like to run the business, what he would like to do. So when we are trying to accommodate and work with him in terms of trying to find out how do we justify it, and I remember clearly saying, well, if we could sway or get people to understand the challenges Eskom face in a monthly breakfast show, then that may well be money worth spent, because it's quite hard to explain all the challenges the company faces, whether it's at an operational level or a financial level, trying to build 4 mega projects at the same time, the Medupi, Kusile, Ngula, and the main transmission line. There were a lot of challenges, and it would have been valuable to have had a better stakeholder understanding. So that's how we try to say, let's try and work and make sense out of this request.
Okay. Now, the New Age, I mean, I think it's generally accepted that the whole country knows that the New Age is owned by the Gupta family. And I think if one is blatantly honest about it, I think everyone knows the standard of journalism and the standard of broadcasting that ANN7 has. So it's not considered to be a top quality news agency. What was the reason given for New Age being chosen above someone that had a better reputation and certainly held better journalistic skills that could perhaps, as you say, justify the reason for 1.2 million rand a breakfast?
This was a request from the CEO. This was not something we initiated to say, here is a good strategic choice in terms of driving our agenda or our conversation. So it wasn't something we requested. And I would say that, yeah, it was a direct request.
And no reason was given why specifically New Age was chosen,
No,
you know?
Not that I'm aware of. No, it was a request, and we were being asked to try and ensure that it's effective. Yeah.
Effective and justified, as you said
exactly.
earlier. Because that word justify to me is quite important, because I don't think companies should have to justify these kind of things, but be that as it may.
1 minute left.
Thank you, Chair. Then let me just go. I'm sorry. I'm just going to the last page of your statement. Your first bullet point, it concerns me greatly too. And I'm glad that you raised it, that you say that you were deeply concerned that no long-term coal contract had yet been established for the Kusile power station. There were many issues around the Kusile power station that remained unanswered, and while development was going on, remained concerns everywhere else. Did you find that your concerns fell on deaf ears, or when you brought these concerns forward, was action actually taken?
I think this is why I felt if ineffective. I mean, you could raise that issue every quarter in a risk report and not see enough movement in relation to the financial risk that was being run. So I think that there were a number of engagements that were happening at CE level, at the chairman level, trying to get the process going. But certainly we have been busy with Kusile since 2007. And it was at that point 2014 and still not established or concluded a long-term 40-year coal contract to match the asset that was being invested in. And I think today we still have to ask that question.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Welcome. Members, 5 minutes per members' interaction. Thank you very much. The next member is Honorable Salt.
Thank you, Chair. What we're trying to do is we're connecting the dots, and we've heard a lot of different evidence about involvement in Eskom, about various families, Gupta families with links. And so when we look at the role of Mr. Machila, and we see some of the evidence that or some of the documents we've got, we see that Minister Gigaba appointed him to Eskom's board in June 2011, and as acting CEO on 1 April 2014. And now we've also got emails, the so-called Gupta emails that are before us, and of course those implicated can dispute their veracity, but to the effect that on the 22nd of March, Mr. Salim Essa sent Mr. Majila's CV to Mr. Tony Gupta, and Mr. Tony Gupta forwarded that to Mr. Dudazana Zuma on the 23rd of March, and he was soon thereafter appointed. Now, you might not have knowledge to that, but clearly when you start to see the then interference with the IT process to stop certain processes that were ongoing, and you see the new age breakfast promotion, one can very clearly start to connect the dots and to see an involvement.
Issues I would not have known about, all of the underlying emails that you referred to. All I can say is that I could see that the tone in the company was changing, and the way in which we normally drove things was different. That could well be because you have a new leader who feels that we are not working effectively as executives, or that there is a problem in terms of how what people's objectives are. So I think that the facts that I see it as I do around the IT contract, the new age, the steam generator, is that this was not a process that I understood anymore. It was an unpredictable outcome in procurement, and I did not accept that, and I decided to leave. So connecting the dots, yes, but we're connecting the dots now in 2017, and that's why I think we should, we really need to ask those people.
I understand.
Yeah.
Taking you back to that time, though, you would have been aware of the Public Finance Management Act. You would have been aware of governance at Eskom,
exactly.
And suddenly you start to see a shift taking place, and you start raising. And it's fine that you don't necessarily connect the dots, but the New Age deal, for example, here you've got a sponsorship initially for a year. You think it could be beneficial. Suddenly, there's a request to change from 1 year to 3 years and remove a standard exit clause. Now, just from straightforward governance, surely that must raise red flags.
Absolutely.
And what did you then do to try to stop that process?
Well, firstly, the finance director did not sign the contract. She did not co-sign the contract.
Yes.
We discussed this at the board audit and risk. But it was signed and it was implemented. And as I said, it came up then at the audit, and it was reported as an irregularity to IRBA, that the CEO had exceeded his mandate in authorizing this contract. So we did address it within the governance framework, and it was discussed.
Sure. But to date, no disciplinary action was ever instituted. It was raised as an audit query. I picked that up.
Yeah, it was.
But the contract went through, the money was paid.
Yes, it was paid.
Irregularly, and in contravention, one could probably say, of Public Finance Management Act, given the audit query that was raised.
I agree.
Then the IT procurement process, is it correct that it could have led to a saving of almost R1 billion? That is some of the documentation we got. Had that contract not been extended, and had the IT been done internally, as was one of the proposals. There's an allegation that due to Mr. Machila's intervention, it cost Eskom almost R1 billion because of the human resources issues, the delays, and then eventually at the last minute, that contract was extended. And are you aware that it caused substantial loss to Eskom?
1 minute left.
I had already left at this time, so I do know that it was banked as part of the savings. It did not materialize, so it is something that they still have to make up. We needed to save at the time over 60 billion rand over 5 years. That was one that was contributing towards it. So, it was the actual financial outcome would then be post my event, post my time.
A last small issue, and that is obviously the Kuiberg replacements of the boilers has still not happened due to litigation and that. And you, as an engineer with a wonderful background, surely that's a matter of concern to you as well, for people living in Cape Town, that those boilers to this day today have still not been replaced.
So the steam generators are on a path to be replaced, I believe, but I'm also now following from the public domain, honourable member. So I do think that they have managed the operations around the steam generator, but from the public information that's out there, that Eskom has said that if beyond 2025, you would have to shut down. So shut down Kubek if you do not replace the steam generators in time. So that is the key challenge.
Wasn't it 2017, 2018?
So that is for alignment with everyone else on the operating, but an absolute hard shutdown, 2025. And that you'll find in the Kubek public safety information, that the forums they have to discuss it, where they've shared that information in the public space.
And thank you from our side for coming to give evidence. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my questions on New Age have been partly covered, but I want to put it here that Eskom engages to a sponsorship of a breakfast event of 1.2 million, and by own admission, you're saying that the organization was not in a financial position, given the financial difficulties at the time, but they went ahead, which is a Gupta company, by the way. And you yourself, the second bullet, you indicate that you had to come up with the rationale, which basically, according to your response, you had to cook the books because of the pressure. That's what you say, because there was no rationale. But the instruction is that you must do it. So you had to cook the breakfast, you see, to make sure that there's money somewhere. There's this 1.2 million that is given. The second other thing, the same CEO that is instructing you to do this is saying that this contract, whilst there was no need for it, whilst they were in a position of financial difficulty, it must be extended to 3 years. Now, I want to ask you, because you have served there with the CEO, under the CEO, what has been your own judgment on his own integrity, Mr. Machila, his own integrity with ethics? Remember, he's leading you, and they're expected to derive inspiration. But the manner in which he's executing the duties, it means he is under pressure by the Guptas. He has to find them a business which does not exist in Eskom, and the least of it is to give them a breakfast event for an amount of 1.2 million, to a point of increasing it over 3 years so that Guptas can continue eating. What is your own value judgment?
I was disturbed by it. In terms of the relationship and leading with Colin Majila, I mean, Mr. Majila, I think, probably chaired 2 EXCO meetings in the 6 months that he was CEO. He was chairing other subcommittees, but in terms of leading him, and I think he was a little distant. And just to talk about the issue about cooking the books, I think what we really wanted to do was to have a chance to try and work with a new CEO. And I think earlier people said, if you have a new boss, you have to see, do you fit around the table still? Are you part of the team? And that's what we were working with Mr. Majila, to try and meet his needs, to see where he wanted to go, as you would give people the benefit of the doubt. But I think clearly once the 3-year contract, the exit clause, the fact that the finance director refused to sign it, and that he then proceeded to sign it by himself, I think shows you that as a team we were saying that this was not how we wanted to run contracts. So we were making a statement.
So would you consider that Mr. Majila was captured by the Guptas, and therefore the refusal of the financial director to sign the 43 million contract was a turn of events which was reaching the climax as to whether one wants to remain captured or not, and therefore the financial director refused to be captured? Will that be, what's your view?
Well, firstly, the language of capture is only a recent thing. Since 2016, I believe we started using the word capture. At the time, we did not understand why. And I think that's an important context.
And he was under pressure.
Or I don't know. He certainly wanted that contract.
Okay. With my 3 minutes left, let me do this. On the IT procurement processes, on the IT procurement process, you're saying that you receive a letter questioning specifically the integrity of the CIO and raising a number of allegations. What were those allegations?
So the allegations were, for example, that he had taken his entire team or large number of members to a conference, a SAPILA conference. It would be questioning a relationship with one of the previous consultants who had provided an interim support to IT. It was questioning the CIO's role in going to an overseas conference, which a supplier had invited him to request. It was a number of questions just around his activity, and then one of it was, in fact, saying people challenged the nature in which the attempts he was trying to do to modernize the IT department. So they were questioning his transformation agenda, for example. Those were the questions.
Last one. I see my minute has been taken, but it's fine. My last one, just before your signature now. You're saying that you were concerned with the contracts, that there was no long-term contracts. It was just short-term contracts. Now I'm asking you, what in your own and you had a problem with that there was no long-term contracts. Now, will you attribute that to the conflicts that existed around procurement, hence they could not engage into long-term contracts? And what were the preferred risk for the country, the fact that you don't have a long-term supply of coal to Eskom?
Well, the preferred view for Eskom is, and for the country, is that we bed down the long-term coal contract costs for Kusile. One of the units has been declared commercial already, which means it needs to operate at a certain output. And every single day we are trucking in coal to generate power there. So that is clearly an inefficient choice. So that is something the country needs to consider. I think that there were a number of discussions happening in parallel to try and look at the transformation agendas around the Kusile long-term supply, and that was where the debates were happening. We did not conclude, and as I say, we still have not concluded that discussion, and that is what I think we need to focus on if we want to reduce the cost of electricity as one of the elements.
No, yes, it's not. What I want to hear is that, was that a manifestation of the conflict within the procurement policy, the fact that you could not have a long-term contract?
It's not a manifestation of the procurement policy. It was you could procure if you wished, but it was not concluding. The negotiations were not concluding. So if there's a conflict, it was about determining terms of agreement. But if the parties agreed, the procurement would proceed because you have a dedicated requirement and offtake for power there. So is it a conflict if people are not resolving? If everyone else is bearing the cost, yes. But I would not say that I was close enough to be able to tell you the direct, but I think there is a challenge and that we need to engage with why that is not concluding, because we are all bearing the cost.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mare. It's your turn. Lucky you, Honorable Kungubele. Thank you.
When you were dealing with let me start at the tail on Quebec. Thank you for availing yourself. I forgot to thank Dade Matuna. When you were dealing with these issues, dealing with Quebec in particular, who was the CEO at that time?
So when I refer to my observations, would be around interim CEO was Colin Machila.
During that time?
Yes. Actually, February, when I first became aware that the team were becoming anxious, Brian Damas was still the CEO.
When was Brian Damas the CEO?
Brian Damas left March 2014. Colin Majila became CEO 1st April 2014.
Okay. You speak about if these generators are not replaced on time, the possible implications. You've listed them nicely there. Did any one of those implications happen, or what? If you can.
So in 2014, that was the concerns that was understood. Today, 2017, late 2017, going towards 2018, I believe that Kuwait Power Station is running their steam generators slightly differently, and hence they've managed to extend or manage the aging process of those steam generators. So that is how they're dealing with it. The other big event that has happened was that this year, the last of the 765 kV, the new transmission line has been commissioned to Cape Town, so that if you have an unexpected outage of a Kubek unit outside of refueling, you will now have a stronger transmission network that can help with the grid power to support the Cape demand.
So, you in a broader context, has the station been fully replenished now?
No, honourable member, they're still busy in the process of replacing those replacing the steam generators. I don't know the timelines any longer.
How many years since then, to date, since this concern developed?
So they started the procurement process in 2008. It was then stopped and has been restarted. And
started in 2008.
They started the technical work. In 2008, and then procurement process of 1 or 2 years later, they restarted the procurement process, and now and then in 2014, I became aware of it. So yes, the issue is still there. It has not been replaced, and I think we need to consider just the alignment of equipment as an operational concern.
So in other words, ma'am, the need for this replacement started in 2008. It was observed in 2008, and attempts to deal with it started then until now.
So people are aware as I said, they track each other's operational processes. So they knew that they would have to replace the steam generators to extend the life of this plant, and so the technical work had started then, and the procurement had started. So there was a procurement process, for example, in 2010, I believe, if I'm correct, and then certainly then the one that I saw. And
so circumstances or conditions for diesel intervention have not occurred?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't occurred since then.
You are speaking about the two divergent questions. Can you share conversation? Can you share that with us?
I think the example of finalizing a 40-year coal contract to minimize operating costs, and at the same time to make sure that you operate in the power system as efficiently, as effectively as possible, versus trying also to achieve a different conversation, a procurement conversation, I think is where I'd say the interests are very divergent. That to me is an example of where you're raising huge operational risks in a transformation process. And at some point I just feel that one needs to say, when do we decide the costs are too high?
Would track the coal for Kusile power station?
That is correct. We are tracking right now. We are tracking now.
Which company?
1 minute left.
I don't know. I don't know which companies are tracking it. I don't know who's doing it.
Is it outsourced?
I left Eskom 3 years ago, so I don't know who's tracking. But as a country, we are tracking in coal too.
Okay, my last question is, what was the relevance of this 1.2 million sponsorship in as far as Eskom is concerned?
So I think we would have wanted to, there was a budget for commercial.
Bigger scheme of things, the purpose of Eskom. How was it enhancing the purpose of Eskom?
I certainly think that the CEO and the board felt, the CEO certainly felt that this was a way in which one could engage and try and understand, promote, discuss, make sure that there's an understanding about the challenges of Eskom. But that's how I understood it.
From your observation?
From my observations, that was the rationale. We would.
Did it have a purpose from your observation? Did it contribute relevantly to Eskom?
No.
Thank you very much. Honorable Gordon, it's your turn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Johnson, for a very crisp document, which is very helpful. So let me take you through some of this very quickly. On page 2, under IT procurement process, you say in bullet point 1 at the beginning, the board committee, if I jump to the third line, had a very clear expectation that we would be changing suppliers. How did you come to this conclusion?
This was feedback I got from the team, who presented to the board tender committee on their sourcing strategy. I think the opportunity to enhance the supplier base is always welcome.
But here it turns out, all right, let me come back to my conclusion a little bit later. Under bullet point 2, you said that a number of audits were requested and completed around the questions of veracity of savings and so on. What exactly was the outcome of the audit? Were there going to be savings?
Yes, there were. One of the audits, in fact, concluded there's a 90% chance that it absolutely is going to be delivered as being proposed. So the audits would prove, for example, the savings. The audits would prove that they would the issue around single sole source suppliers or there were challenges around conflicts, and invariably they would come back saying there is no conflict here, you can proceed. So I think those were the challenges that were coming out in the individual audits that were being asked. Just the number of elements of the processes were being challenged.
So the changes to the IT system, let me understand this, would have resulted in savings?
So it's an IT supplier contract. It's the IT applications and maintenance contract. So it's not it's not the hardware.
Not the hardware.
It's managing the applications and maintenance of the contracts for a 40,000 person company, which is why it's such large numbers.
Sure. Why was it necessary to persecute the CIO, who clearly you found was not guilty of anything? Because this is what follows, and we accept your point. And by the way, some of the dots can only be done retrospectively. So don't worry about that. A lot of us were fooled for a long time as well. So looking back, according to the academics report, that's the pattern. Go for the head of the particular outfit, find some so-called dirt, get rid of them, replace them, and then do what you want to do. Sounds very familiar, similar to what you experienced here.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I don't know the challenges to why. I mean, the CIO he was a good CIO, and he did set a good base for them going forward. Yeah, there was nothing in what was being done that could say that there's a reason why people were so intensely against it. So that was one of the things you didn't understand at the time.
And he wasn't opposed to the changes.
Which changes?
The procurement changes.
No, he was very happy to manage the changes, to make sure that it is done safely, and also in support of his new IT vision.
Okay, from what you say, your main despair during this whole period was that the conversation was more frequently about procurement rather than power supply, operational costs, and the power system as a whole.
That was my despair, yes.
And so the core business was being neglected, relatively neglected.
Yeah, relatively. I mean, I just felt that it's a matter of balance between it is a multifaceted business, but you can't not take sensible operational decisions, because that's the core. If you have the operational decisions inadequate, your costs will rise. You cannot be doing cost saving and still be, for example,
you say that executives were too scared to raise their concerns. What struck fear into them, and who struck fear into them?
So I think the first thing that struck fear into people was when the first when the head of primary energy was suspended. I believe it was June or July 2014. It was a very hardworking person. There was a dispute around a particular conversation, and it was a shock. Um, and then the challenges started. Like, there's a request to suspend the CIO, and people understood that. Like, what is this? Is a direct challenge. I think that's the two. And then I think there was one more incident which really concerned me, and that I became aware in my last month of Eskom that um, some of our general managers were not willing to talk as much before, and they were being effectively asked to not provide all the information or comments. For example, I would be sitting at a board tender committee where I'm presenting and requesting a particular commodity, and someone would raise a question and say, and challenge, and for example, the IT savings, but yet I'd know it's been audited at least. Not one member of the officials would actually say anything. Just the silence in the company was a concern. There were very definite methods by which people were being asked like, to keep quiet, and I found that
from a distance. Would you say that climate still exists in
absolutely. It intensified, I believe. And this, I can only say this because people would raise that. But
So
I think
let's note that as a committee, that the climate of fear is actually persisting. One last question, Chair. No. It's an important one. She mentions, importantly, that all of this has implications for operating costs. What that means is that it has implications for the cost of electricity to ordinary citizens.
Yes.
Now, how do we compute? How do we compute the new age stuff, the IT stuff, the coal trucking, etc., etc.? How do we compute all of that as a cost to the citizen and as a cost to doing business in South Africa?
I think the big expenditure we have to watch in Eskom would be the coal costs, the asset creation, the contracts for asset creation, so just around the building, the asset creation, and then certainly labor costs, I think salary bills, certainly. So while the smaller contracts definitely contribute significant savings, I think we need to drive efficiencies in other places first. I think that's my sense. Not, I would certainly say that one would look at it in context, but what up, yeah.
You're welcome. Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. On behalf of the committee, I would like to convey our appreciation for your willingness to come, firstly to come and sit and wait for us during the first session, and as well as your cooperation with the interaction with the committee. It's very much appreciated.
Drawn from some of our international experience just to add in as possible sort of questions or suggestions for you to consider. So just to, I wanted to read something because I think there has been maybe a lot of discussion and particularly I noticed this morning around the sort of intricacies of are we doing the right thing, or even sort of whether some of these bills would actually not be the right way to go. It should go. I felt there was a lot of pedantism. So maybe I just thought to read a paragraph here is, while it would be foolish to claim that a candidate or a party's war chest in and of itself can determine the results of an election, it is obvious that an empty war chest can be a significant barrier to entry into an electoral process. Moreover, a grossly unequal distribution of resources can create the appearance of unfairness, which can affect the legitimacy of an election outcome. And now this is drawn from a policy paper on South American campaign financing and party political financing. So I just thought that it's maybe important for us to realize that what we are doing has been done before and done.
No, there are no minutes. And on that note, thank you very much, members, for your cooperation. The meeting is adjourned, and thank you very much from our guests, including members of the media.
What time tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Group Chambers.
What time?
Tomorrow night, Group Chambers. Yeah.
Which chambers?
They don't want to give us dedicated.
Why are we part of this? Why are we